Good evening from the European Parliament here in Brussels. You're watching Raw Politics. Now, this week it was all about Brexit and migration, and all eyes were on that summit in Salzburg. And here are all the highlights in case you missed it. Hungary is hitting back following Brussels' slapdown last week. It's ready for battle, launching a legal challenge against the European Parliament. And this is after MEPs voted last week to trigger what is called Article 7. That's a disciplinary process against Hungary for allegedly undermining core EU core values. Now, here's Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban earlier today.
We can only call this report as an absurd collection of lies. Even a law student could state that the method of the approval of this report violates the Treaty of the European Union. They want to proceed against a member state because of the suspected defiance of the rule of law situation in a way that disregards the basic rule of law regulations. The Hungarian government plans to make legal steps. I will charge Minister Gulyás with the case.
So I think Viktor Orban was having a problem with the fact that the abstentions were not counted in the total. So this is what he's challenging. Do you think he's any chance of succeeding, Darren?
No, and those rules were set out before the vote last week. Now, obviously, this is unprecedented because there's not actually been a vote in the European Parliament on starting or triggering the Article 7 process before. But the rules were set out, as I say, but before the vote. I think what you are seeing here is a bruised ego to a degree. Over 2/3 of MEPs voting in this is pretty damning for Hungary. But also, as some MEPs pointed out last week who are sympathetic to Viktor Orban, this plays domestically quite well for him. And I suspect he will keep ramming home this message that actually it is him versus the European Union because it'll go down with the people that most support him.
Yeah, Valentina, what do you think? Is it a bruised ego or is it really a strategy for him to keep picking fights with Brussels to shore up his support?
It's definitely a strategy, and I must say it didn't serve, it didn't make the European Parliament, didn't do itself any favors by creating a bit of confusion ahead of the vote. So the lead lawmaker in charge of this procedure actually was briefing journalists the week before, and she was saying the opposite. She was saying the thing that Orban is saying, that if you go there and cast your vote as an abstention, that is counted in the overall turnout. So in the end, there was a lot of confusion on the day, like what happened actually and what rule does apply. And this serves Mr. Orban, of course, perfectly. I mean, it's like a slam dunk for him to profit of this confusion.
Buys into the stitch-up.
Exactly. But Mihail, your movement is you're associating yourself with Viktor Orban. And this is associating yourself with a man who was seen here as violating the core values of the EU. I mean,
first of all, I don't see that they are a real violation. It's basically, first of all, let me think that I think that it's kind of nail or additional nail in the coffin of the EU as it functions today for several reasons. First of all, it is seen by many as an attack against democracy. Orban was elected.
Many, I mean, that is, you have to quantify that.
Look, and they are after him because he didn't accept the migrants, because he didn't accept Soros' interference in the Hungarian politics, and for many other reasons, because he is a Christian, because he's pro-life, because he's fighting for a certain number of values, and he's fighting for his people. But I want to tell you that on top of that, because of this vote, they are making of Mr. Orban a kind of iconic figures, within a lot of European circles, populist circles for sure. We had Mr. Salvini because he closed the harbors, and now we have Mr. Orban because he's defending the right of its people. I want to look, what is happening now? As long as the EU was meddling with economic problem or question, this was second zone, issue.
But just to put it out there, there were laws. There were laws.
Yeah, I think we also have to say so. The European Union is made up of lots of liberal democracies. Yeah. I mean, I think Viktor Orban already himself has described Hungary as a liberal democracy. Yes, exactly. And so in those circumstances, this is where there is this, this chasm that's now opening up. In that, there are elements of Viktor Orban's administration that are illiberal. You cannot deny that.
Guys, and that is saying it himself for now.
So that's clearly at odds with some of the founding principles of the European
But I think
Union.
there's one important voice that we need to bring in here, which is the Hungarian people. So let's go to Hungary, where we have Robert Szekányi, who is on the ground for us, because we know there has been a protest of some 1,000 people in Hungary against against the vote against Hungary. They say that it is against the Hungarian people. Robert, can you bring us up to speed with what is the opinion down there?
Because of the fact that the EP vote happened and Article 7 has been triggered, there were these protests. There was this protest on Sunday. And that is a reaction of people, you know, because the whole summer nothing happened in Budapest. Everyone was on vacation. After the elections earlier this year, people just sunk into apathy and nothing happened in there. But now there was this protest, like 4,000 people were there. And they also announced a new protest starting tomorrow. One of the opposition forces leader, former PM Ferenc Gyurcsány, announced a continuous protest starting tomorrow at 5 p.m. And he said that they wouldn't leave the streets as long as Mr. Orbán would step down. And also on our national holiday, 23rd of October, there is another protest to be announced, organized by civilians.
All right, thank you for that, Robert Szekányi in Budapest for us. Now, I want to read something from Steve Bannon, his quote saying, "I absolutely do not condemn Orbán or what Salvini is doing. These individuals, these populist national movements across Europe are trying to get the sovereignties of their countries back." That is Steve Bannon talking there. He's founder of the movement. Also, we have Marine Le Pen. She said, "In France, our objective is to beat Macron. In Europe, it is to build with our allies, the other nationalist groups, a majority that makes a break from the decaying European Union." Marine Le Pen, the National Rally leader. So, okay, Michael, I'll ask you.
So, many things to say about this.
But well, first of all, is Steve Bannon working with Viktor Orbán?
We'll meet him soon, I think, and we'll see. For the rest, several comments. First, for the first time, you are touching to the identity of the people, because the EU would like to impose on the Hungarian, on the people with whom they have to live. That's why they are all up in arms in many countries, because the Hungarians and many people say within Europe, we have to decide for ourselves who shall be our neighbors next door. I would like to add about the vote several things. First, it's 2/3, 1/3. It'll be very interesting to see after the next election how such a vote would develop after what I believe will be the populist uprising. But I would like to add something about the vote. We have made a check. It happens that within Mr. Soros' circles, there is a confidential document called Reliable Allies of Open Society in the European Parliament. It happens that the rapporteur,
so
Mr. Sargentini, is a reliable partner of Mr. Orbán, and we check almost all the MEPs present that are seen as reliable partners have voted in favor of the condemnation of Hungary. This is that you have a lot of lobbying going on.
Let's give Valentina a chance
within
to
the
reply.
European Parliament.
You are Belgian. You are a Belgian politician. In Belgium, there is such a thing as freedom of university and freedom of media. Would you condone that in Belgium such policies from the government are being put in place, that freedom of expression and of the media and of universities are curtailed to cater to a specific party in government?
I would never accept that a billionaire from the US would finance a university with the aim in order to build up a movement, in order to bring down the elected government.
Are you actively looking at the funding that Free University in Brussels is getting, or Catholic University in Louvain is getting?
The aim is not to undermine our government. The aim is not to undermine the current government. This is the problem of Mr. Soros. He wants to play a role with his money, you know, with the university and NGO in order to change the policy of the elected government.
Bad guy as well. It's just pretty clear that Viktor Orbán's, what he thinks of Hungary and the future of Europe as an illiberal democracy is clearly at odds with what Europe has been traditionally made up of.
It's not that odds with the will of the people.
Okay, guys, I will have to cut it here for a while. It was a meeting of interior ministers in Vienna on Friday, which set the whole thing off. Pens as well as insults were thrown at Luxembourg's foreign minister, Jean Asselborn, and he took on Italy's deputy prime minister, Matteo Salvini. The two clashed over their views on migration, and they have been locked in a war of words ever since. Take a look.
Io rispondo pacatamente al suo punto di vista che non è mio. Se in Lussemburgo avete bisogno di nuova immigrazione, io in Italia preferisco aiutare gli italiani a tornare a fare. Io non l'ho interrotta cortesemente, se lei mi lasciasse finire, io non l'ho.
Au Luxembourg, on avait des dizaines de milliers d'Italiens.
Io non l'ho interrotta.
Comme migrants qui ont travaillé à Luxembourg pour que vous, en Italie, vous avez de l'argent pour payer pour vos enfants. Merde alors.
You may know Paul Taylor from his WTF France series, and if you don't know him yet, you will definitely know the subject of his humor. He gently and sometimes not so gently mocks all things French, from food to language to bureaucracy. We're going to catch up with him in a minute, but first let's look at his recent work. An easy target, French strikes.
Seems to me like Les Grèves is like the Second Amendment in the US. You know, no other country understands it. It's a pain in the ass and people get really angry and they take it away. I get it, Jean-Pierre. You go on strike because you want more money and more holidays, but the French company you work for disagrees. It's like a divorce negotiation.
Divorce pour tous!
And like every divorce negotiation, it doesn't just get solved by you buggering off down the street with your mates. It's just really annoying.
Why is it annoying, Paul?
I'm glad you asked. It's really annoying for one reason. Number one, because you going on strike for your own selfish reasons has a domino effect for the rest of us. For example, today it's my grandmother's birthday, but because she lives in England, the wine that she drinks tastes like the devil's piss, so I'm going to send her this quality box of wine. But I need to go to the post office. But they're on strike. Or are they on lunch? It's really difficult to tell. Oh no, they're definitely on strike because of email. Email's taking all their jobs.
Your focus is always on stereotypes. Do you not think that divides us a little bit more in Europe?
I think it can do. I think that like specifically now with like the kind of uprising of kind of, you know, far-right parties, they use stereotypes negatively to kind of try and split us apart. But I'm more of the opinion that if we can laugh about each other's stereotypes all together, then it kind of brings us closer, and that's kind of the idea that I had behind the documentary series, yeah.
So you mean your videos are intentionally offensive, but do people have the right not to be protected from being offended? Is that not a bit politically incorrect?
I have the opinion that I have on this is the opinion that one of my favourite comedians, Ricky Gervais, has, is that people can get offended. They're allowed to be offended. It doesn't mean that they're right, though. And I think, you know, nowadays, with social media and everything kind of exploding, people get offended very quickly about stuff that maybe a couple of years ago they didn't, with this thing where somebody can send out a tweet and it can just get retweeted and it can get out of context. And I think that's the hardest thing is as a comedian is saying things on stage in the context of a 1 hour show. If they're taken out of context, sometimes they're misunderstood.
So now, Paul, we're here at Mini UK.
Yes.
We've seen some little anti-Brexit protesters.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
So we know how the curator of this museum feels about Brexit. Take a look at this map. I picked it up at a petrol station outside Strasbourg.
Okay.
So according to the French, Brexit means Brexit. And the UK is already officially off the map.
Oh, it's already done. Well, that's the thing in France. Like, everyone thinks we're already gone. Like, I spend my time telling people, no, it hasn't happened yet. We said we were going to get divorced, but the papers haven't come through yet. So we're not yet divorced.
Yeah, technically you're still a fully functioning member.
But clearly the French think that we do. Well, that's typically French, you know.
You're going to have to compromise. Theresa May says, like, this is it. This is my deal. I cannot move on this. Politically, in Britain, she's in a corner. You're going to have to compromise.
Well, it's always possible to make compromises. And I think I live in Belgium. That's a country that knows very well the art of compromising. But what we will not do is to compromise in a way that we destroy the single market or the European Union. That we will not do. We cannot, for example, compromise in saying, okay, yeah, the customs union doesn't exist anymore in the European Union, and we're going to make a facilitated customs arrangement with different tariffs and outsourcing or customs duties. That is not possible. So even when I want to compromise, it is impossible to compromise on such a thing. But I think it is possible, nevertheless, to find a way out.
Are you glad you're dealing with Theresa May rather than someone like Boris Johnson?
Well, I think that a number of leading people in the Conservative Party are very much aware of the fact that a hard Brexit will be devastating, not only for the European Union, but far more for Britain. And these people, I listen to these people, and one of these people is certainly the Prime Minister, Theresa May. She knows very well that this is not an option. And so we are working towards a deal, an agreement, but it has to be an agreement that doesn't destroy the principles and the system of the European Union. Certainly not, because since Brexit, what we have seen on the continent is a growing support from different public opinions in favor of the European Union, in favor of the single market, in favor of our single currency. And why this is? Because people are seeing what is happening in Britain. They say, okay, I'm also very critical towards the European Union, but I'm not so stupid to leave the Union or to
So
try to break
Brexit's
it.
been good for the EU?
Well, in a certain way, it helps now people to understand what the benefits are from the European Union. And that is more clear for a lot of people since Brexit, yeah?
We will stay with the Brexit theme now, but we'll move on to farming for today's Eurostars. Well, we see the two are fighting after DEFRA released the first edition of this video, showing lusciously green fields, blue skies, and rolling hills. Well, the video was supposed to be a post-Brexit farming utopia. Well, the only problem was the farms weren't actually British, but German and Slovenian. Now, these images saved from that video show Slovenian cow shed and an aerial shot of a German farm. DEFRA blamed their PR agency and say the mistake will be corrected as soon as possible. Well, that is quite a blunder, isn't it? But I mean, is it telling of what Brexit may bring? Are you reading anything more into this?
I'm just thinking, you could have predicted this. This is DEFRA not the first to stumble headlong into this particular scenario. You just got to wonder about the PR company that thought that was a good idea and didn't triple check every single bit of footage.
Absolutely. But what with regard to a serious topic, agriculture? I mean, what are we looking at there?
Agriculture is important to Britain. It is still only 1 or 2% of the economy, so it's not crucial to Britain's economy. It's not the city of London, for example, but it is one of these passionate issues, like we see in France and indeed in Ireland. Farmers care, and they've got an awful lot of political clout. They will not be happy. They will not be happy farmers that European Union images are being used to portray their farmers. At the end of the day, someone messed up. And also, shouldn't the civil service be doing something better than some ridiculous PR campaign?
Once again, there's a risk our lifeboat could be overturned. We're forced to back away from desperate, drowning people. The rescuers are doing their best to keep control of the situation. It's at that point that I learned there's a pregnant woman on the raft.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. That was a short excerpt from Euronews' documentary, 10 Days at Sea, the real story of the Aquarius. Our correspondent, Annelies Borges, she was the only correspondent broadcast journalist on that ship. And it came to symbolize, really, the migrant crisis in Europe over that summer. And Annelies has been tracking and following the stories of some of the people she met on board. Annelies, good to see you there. So can you tell us, what's happened to some of those people you've made, connections with there, you've met?
Well, the ones I was able to track down, Tessa, have now applied for asylum in Spain, where the vast majority stay, but also here in France, where 78 people from the Aquarius were brought to. And after that very difficult journey that saw them leave their hometowns in African countries, cross Libya, and then take that dangerous crossing of the Mediterranean Sea, they were all very happy to get to Europe. Back in June, when we disembarked in Valencia, they spoke about big plans, about going back to school, getting a job, finding a house. They knew it was not going to be easy, but they were very hopeful about the future. Well, reality has since kicked in, and they have told me about how difficult it is to be presented with a whole new set of challenges in a different languages, a convoluted legal procedure. And some told me they are starting to wonder whether or not Europe will be able to deliver their dream of a prosperous and peaceful life.
These are, quite literally, the first few steps of Reward's brand new journey, or as he prefers to put it, his second chance in life.
You see that guy from there? That was when I stood for the first time when I saw this place. It came to my mind, the Aquarius, like, wow.
Do you think about Aquarius often?
That was a new beginning of a new life. When you think that hope is lost, there a new door is open. No one will forget something of that nature.
Reward Ocko was the last person to disembark from the Aquarius 3 months ago, when the charity vessel found itself at the heart of a diplomatic crisis that threatened to split Europe apart. Aquarius spent days stuck at sea with 630 people on board after Italy decided to close its ports to refugees and migrants rescued in the Mediterranean. Malta said it wouldn't let the vessel dock either. The standoff ended when Spain agreed to provide a safe harbor to the men, women and children who had risked everything to get to Europe. After disembarking in Valencia, Reward was taken to Bilbao, where he applied for asylum. While authorities examine his case, which could take up to 3 years, he's been given accommodation and a small allowance so that he can feed and clothe himself. For now, his sole responsibility is to attend 3 hours of Spanish lesson per day. But Reward is eager to do more. Free time, he says, is his worst enemy.
Most of the time, sitting alone or sitting around the house, I might get bored, and sometimes some kind of flash memories can just come in, like.
What kind of memories?
One of my friends, actually. I lost him in the prison. He was arrested, but as time goes on, he died also within the prison premises.
In Libya?
Yeah, in Libya.
Those who arrived in Europe aboard Aquarius bore different scars. Some had fled conflict. Others were escaping from equally crippling poverty. Now they get to experience a new reality, one that won't necessarily correspond to their dreams.
You mentioned that your dream would be to become a pilot. Do you feel as though you're a little closer to your dream now that we're sitting here in Bilbao?
It's quite a beginning of the step, actually. It's a step because there can be more opportunity, more than in Africa, actually. Because for now, we have to make some savings. It's going to be a really, really long time. And it's going to take a time. It might happen, but I don't know.
So it might happen, but uncertainty really seems to be a feeling shared by many of the people I have met in Spain, these people who disembarked in Valencia on June 17th and are now trying to come to terms with the magnitude of the challenges ahead. They have yet to learn whether or not they can stay in Europe, and of course they have no idea what their European life will be like.
And at least the uncertainty is not just for the people that you met on board, it's also for the actual rescuers and the rescue ships. Because, you know, each time they come to the shores of Europe, there are questions of whether or not they can dock, or were they in the right or in the wrong. What is the fate of these ships and rescuers?
Well, Aquarius has exposed these unresolved tensions. He has really revealed these profound divisions and different experiences each one of the EU member states have been confronted with regards to the migrant crisis. Italy, or at least the Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini, says Italy has already done too much and has seen very little help from the EU. It's time for the EU to do more, according to Matteo Salvini. And by closing Italian ports and handing over control of those search and rescue operations to Libyan authorities, Matteo Salvini has made the work of these charity groups virtually impossible. They say, these rescuers say, that they feel powerless and they feel that politics are being placed above people's lives. The UNHCR says the consequence has been a huge surge in the number of deaths in the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, NGOs and the UN alike are urging Europe to come up with a solution, a unified response that takes into consideration the overriding legal obligation placed on everyone, flag and coastal states, as well as all vessels, which is the duty to provide assistance to those in distress at sea.
All right, thank you for that, Annelise Borges, our correspondent. And with me to discuss this in more detail, we have our very own political editor, Darren McCaffrey, Jennifer Baker from BrusselsGeek.com, and a Washington Post contributor, Tesa Arcilla. This week, we have the Salzburg summit coming, and migration is going to feature very prominently on that. Do you think policy, I'll put it to you, policy will change anything?
Well, I mean, policy has got to be one of the solutions. Or
will the policy change, rather?
Yeah,
actually?
I mean, based on Salzburg, probably not, but based on future summits going forward. What's really interesting, however, is the position of, it's happening in Salzburg because Austria is holding the presidency. The position of Kurz has changed a little bit there.
Right.
He seems to be softening, distancing himself a little bit more from Salvini and other sort of
basically, just to explain that he used to blame Brussels a lot, like Brussels. Now he's saying that the frontline countries have to step up and pull their weight as well.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I mean, that could sort of be the turning point for how negotiations are going to go. I mean, you've also got to say there are political solutions out there that are being proposed, and countries aren't actually implementing them. The whole burden sharing has not really come to pass in the way it should have. And then you get into, you know, these tit for tat arguments in the Mediterranean Sea between Malta and Italy. And, you know, I think during this whole process, what we're losing sight of is, I mean, at least get people ashore. Human Rights Watch put out a report in the last day or so saying it was like 1,600 people have been killed and lost so far this year. I mean, you can redo political positions, you can redo paperwork. You can't breathe life back into someone at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea.
It's said that the European Union very much still view the solution to these problems not being in Europe, but being at the place of origin. They are quite pleased and keep reiterating this point, Tessa, that, 84%, I think, are the numbers done on the peak in terms of migrant levels compared to 2015. They're back at pre-2015 levels. Also, because of a deal, no one has travelled from Egypt in the past year. So they very much view the solution not being in Europe, but being at the point of origin.
Exactly, that's another point that has to be really discussed. As the Salzburg summit wraps up, we have been taking a look at some of the moments which perhaps didn't make it onto your screens. It turns out that aside from the diplomacy and statesmanship, Europe's politicians, they're not so different from us after all. That's today's Eurostars. Giorgio Armani once said jeans represent democracy in fashion. Well, you have to wonder if Viktor Orban had that in mind as he arrived in Salzburg amid a democracy spat with the EU. According to Donald Tusk, he needed to cool down emotions ahead of the summit. He posted this photo on his Instagram page. A day later, this one with Theresa May with a not-so-subtle caption, "Sorry, no cherries." And finally, Angela Merkel in the Nutcracker. The German chancellor was captured struggling to crack a nut during dinner. Eventually, she appears to give up. Well, let's hope she and other leaders have a stronger resolve when it comes to Brexit and migration. Well, there you go. They're human after all. Which one did you like the most there?
I like Donald Tusk. I really like Donald Tusk.
I mean, this is
the video he did last week as well, or 2 weeks ago, with his upcoming picks, you know, the trailer for the action movie.
But do you think this is probably an image of politicians that people should see a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, earlier we had a photograph of all the men in suits. I think there was 3 men. And I thought to myself, you know, does that really represent the people who are looking at it? So, you know, well done to Orban on the jeans, on that point only.
You have the US President Donald Trump. He was asked about the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. Let's take a look at what he said.
Jean-Claude is a tough man. He's a very good man. I like him, but he's tough. He's nasty. the kind of guy I want negotiating for me. But he's a tough, tough cookie. And I said to him, we have to renegotiate the deal. He said, but Mr. President, we are very happy with the deal. We don't want to negotiate. I said, you may be happy with the deal, but I'm not happy with the deal. And he didn't want to renegotiate. And after 3 times, he still didn't want to renegotiate. I said, that's okay. We don't have to renegotiate any longer. We're going to put a tariff on all of the millions of cars you send into the United States. And honestly, he was in my office so quickly from Europe that I didn't know they had airplanes that flew that fast.
It sounds like a compliment for Jean-Claude Juncker. Do you think by saying that he doesn't think the U.S. got what they wanted out of those negotiations?
I don't know that Trump knows if the US got what it wanted out of it or not. Trying to read Trump's mind and logic is not a healthy occupation. Juncker, I wouldn't say is a tough cookie, but he's smart. He has clearly found ways to find a friend with Trump. But bear in mind that Juncker won't be here next year. At the end of the year, for sure. Trump may not be here next year either if the things continue as they're going and Mueller continues as he's going. So the tariff issue as well, in terms of cars, Europe can play the long game with this, and I don't think Trump appreciates that. Yeah,
did Europe do a good job in these negotiations?
Yes, definitely, and I think the character of Jean-Claude Juncker matches the sort of ecstatic character of Trump. So in a way, they found each other. It's a good match, and I'm sure Jean-Claude Juncker loves these comments about himself coming from Trump.
Yeah, indeed. Catherine?
Well, I think he should be selling the rights to the book from Ron Howard, you know, the Art of the Deal 2. Right. I think he should call it Nasty.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, the European Commission is going after more big tech companies, and this time it's Amazon and Facebook's turn again. Well, the EU's formidable competition commissioner, Margrethe Vestager, has a penchant for going after tech titans, and now she's launched a preliminary investigation into Amazon over concerns that it's trawling data from third-party sellers to unfairly predict the next big thing. Meanwhile, her colleague Vera Jourova is hot on Facebook and Airbnb's heels. So is the European Commission anti-tech, or is it a trailblazer in regulating Silicon Valley's unwieldy multinationals? Now, before we get into this with our panel, let us hear exactly what Margrethe Vestager and Vera Jourova had to say on these issues.
If you, as Amazon, get the data from the smaller merchants that you host, which can be, of course, completely legitimate because you can improve your service to these smaller merchants, well, do you then also use these data to do your own calculations as what is the new big thing? What is it that people want? What kind of offers do they like to receive? What makes them buy things?
I will not reveal that or hide that I am becoming rather impatient, because we have been in dialogue with Facebook almost 2 years, and I really want to see not a progress. It's not enough for me. I want to see the results.
And joining us here in the studio, we have Jennifer Baker. She is a tech journalist here in Brussels. We also have David Martin. He's a senior legal officer from BEUC. It's a consumer organization. And we have still with us Sam. I apologize, I forgot your name. But you have Sam. He's still with us on this panel. Now, I'd like to start with you, Jennifer. This Amazon case, Facebook case, Margrethe Vestager going after these big tech companies, is it a sign of the EU being ahead of its time, actually?
Well, very possibly. I mean, we hear an awful lot of, rhetoric about how Margrethe Vestager is anti-America, and I think that's just symptomatic of the fact that these big tech companies do come from the States. I've seen a lot of accusations of EU protectionism around this. But, with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, having come into force, the focus is very much on data. And I think what Vestager has been saying is she wants to bring this element of data, because that's kind of, we hear data is the new oil. She wants to bring that very much into competition cases. And, she's right, because we think about the big tech companies, and there's really only a handful of them running the whole show. I mean, find me someone who doesn't use at least one of the services of Facebook or Google or Amazon.
I mean, what is at stake here? The issue of privacy, the issue, David, I want to put that to you. What is the biggest issue at stake here that the EU is trying to protect?
Well, it's basic consumer protection. It's the rights of consumers. It's also the privacy of consumers, and also the competition landscape. It's very important that there's a competitive landscape also from a point of view of consumer protection, consumer welfare, and consumer choice. I would like to echo that, in my opinion, there's no anti-American or anti-tech motive here. It's just the Commission doing its job. It doesn't matter if it's an American, a German, or a French company. If you do business here in Europe, you have to comply with our rules.
And Sam Morgan, we'll keep calling you that now, is the EU doing a good job so far?
I mean, if you take the Commission as this kind of guardian of the rules, it is doing its job. I think the only thing about the Amazon case that maybe is the thing that is raising eyebrows is that it was kind of unprovoked. It wasn't a competitor kind of saying, oh, look what Amazon is doing. It's not saying that the Commission doesn't have a right to go into these matters, but you can see why a big tech giant would go, nobody asked you to do this, in a way.
All right, but let's look at, what other big tech company key payouts that we have had from the European Commission, because, it has raked in some pretty sizey sums from Silicon Valley over the last few years. Let's look. We had Apple that was forced to pay back 13 billion euros in taxes to Ireland in 2016. Facebook, 110 million, quickly followed by Google, who had to fork out 2.4 billion in 2017. And just last July, Google had to once again pay a record 4.34 billion euros. I mean, are these tech companies going to be deterred?
I mean, I think that's the idea. I mean, these figures are sort of drops in the ocean to them, but that's why, we've got new rules that can be 10% of global turnover, not just EU turnover. I mean, when you think about, so for example, the Apple case, that's money going back into the Irish coffers because it was deemed to be illegally helping out one particular company. And you can't really allow countries to do that. And the reason some of them are so big is because they're able to shop around between different countries and pay next to no corporation tax.
And what about, but David, from consumers' point of view, what about, you go onto Amazon. It's really convenient when it can predict what you want next. I mean, that's not so bad, is it?
It's a convenient service for consumers, but if it's not playing by the rules and if it's preventing other services that could also be very convenient for consumers from actually rising, we have a problem because we have there's no consumer choice, basically, and prices could rise and it could abuse its dominant position, and that's a problem from a consumer perspective.
All right, and what about... the other side of the story. When Google and these companies come in here, they say, well, look, we're actually bringing in jobs, we're bringing in technology, we're bringing in all the good stuff. So what is there to complain about?
I mean, you said about, it's convenient, but it's also a slippery slope. Where do you go from if you don't protect the rules? I mean, that is what the EU is there for. It's a rules-based bloc.
As Merkel breaks bread with the European leaders tonight, her decision back home to oust Germany's top spy isn't going down smoothly. In fact, Hans-Georg Maassen joins a small club of politicians to lose their job and then end up with a promotion, making him tonight's Eurostar. It all started with a video allegedly showing right-wing protesters chasing a man through the streets of Chemnitz. In the midst of protests over the arrest of 2 migrant men for allegedly murdering a German man, asked about the vigilante attacks, Maassen suggested the video was not real. He was also accused of sharing confidential information with the far-right AfD. And yesterday, Merkel responded to growing pressure and fired Maassen. But no sooner had he lost his job than he was offered another, a promotion to Interior Ministry State Secretary with a pay rise. That's the week that was. In case you missed it, join us again on Monday, same time, same place, here on Raw Politics.